Hi there. Some of you guys might already know me, but if you don't, my name is Ed. I go by the Sussex Wine Guy online. And I just want to kind of intro myself first. I've already done an intro video before, but I'm going to do it again. So I've been involved in the wine industry for about 10 years. A lot of that was spent in hospitality, but I'm now employed by one of the UK's largest wine specialist retailer as a store manager. And have just such a huge passion for wine. I've also recently sat and passed my WSET 3 with merit, which I'm exceedingly proud of. If you're kind of conscious of my content that I've produced before, you'll know that I'm normally on either Instagram or TikTok, but I've kind of had the inkling to produce some longer form content. And to kind of scratch that itch, we're here. So this is going to kind of turn into a series. I'll break down how that works, how that's going to work. So, I'm looking for an outlet to share my passion for wine. Selling wine to customers just isn't cutting it properly at the minute. So we're going to be talking in kind of a nice long form term about wines and styles that I'm really kind of into, and hopefully I can get you into as well. We'll be talking about some fairly niche stuff over time, though we're not starting out niche because we're starting out with Burgundy. I am an enormous lover of Chardonnay. You'll see it on some of the reviews that I've done on my Instagram recently. It's just a lot of Chardonnay at the minute. I'm on a real kind of bent for it. But when I was kind of researching my way through and thinking of what I wanted to look at and kind of the ideas that I wanted to explore for this kind of content, talking about Chardonnay really kind of came to mind. And when it came to thinking about where I wanted to start looking, obviously Burgundy, the home of Chardonnay, was right at the top of the list. So that's what we're going to be talking about over the next kind of couple of videos. I don't quite have a schedule for this yet. Obviously, I'm doing this in my spare time, which coming up towards Christmas like we are is getting quite rare. But a little bit on what we're going to talk about. So focusing in Burgundy. Burgundy is very long and thin. It kind of spreads between the city of Dijon and Lyon in the south. And covers a really, really wide area of environments. You have quite high mountains, you've got river valleys, you've got beautiful open stretches of land. But we're not actually going to be talking about the bit of Burgundy between Dijon and Lyon to start with. We're starting out with Chablis, which is part of the kind of macro wider area of Burgundy, but isn't actually considered part of the central area of Burgundy, that bit that sits between those two major cities. We actually need to travel about 85 miles northeast of Dijon, which is pretty much halfway to Paris from Dijon. If you're looking at it on a map, I'm sure I'll put something here. And that takes us to Chablis. But first, I've got to go grab something. Oh, right. Alrighty, I have in my hands an Chablis. I just actually picked this up at my local supermarket. I know I feel like a traitor to my own place of work, but needs must. So this is produced by J. Moreau and Feel. This is a Chablis Villevin from 2020. A little bit of insight on the language used on a bottle. So Chablis is the appellation that it comes from. Generally, you'll get a year on it, especially with single varietal stuff. The only time you wouldn't really get a year of production would be if it's something like a non-vintage champagne or a multi-vintage champagne, but on a multi-vintage you'll probably get a number of years. And Villevin, that's kind of the key thing on this bottle. Villevin means old vine. Now, old vines, as a generality, will produce less grapes, But the great thing about them producing less grapes is that they can put more time and, well, we're talking about a plant here, a weed, really. But that said weed can put more time and more energy into those individual grapes. So you get lower yields from those vines, but you also get better quality fruit. You get a higher concentration of sugars, you get a higher concentration of flavour, and thus it produces less but better wine. Let's see if we can get a nice pop on the micro. Oh yeah. Now, Chablis as a style of wine is very, very fresh. As a generality for Chablis, they don't often see any kind of barrel aging, which you'll get in some other AOCs of Burgundy. But what you will see is a process called malolactic conversion. Now, malolactic conversion takes one type of acid and turns it into another type of acid. So naturally in wines, as in stuff like green apples, you have an acid called malic acid. Now, malic acid is what makes a green apple taste sharp. Like if you bite into a cooking apple, your cheeks go all dry, your mouth starts absolutely just like salivating all over the place. But what this does is it's a bacteria that eats the malic acid and produces lactic acid. Now, our tongues detect that lactic acid as the same kind of feeling that we get when we drink milk or cream. Like we get that kind of milky, creamy feeling in there, which a lot of people do see as oak sometimes. They pick it up as that kind of vanilla wooded tone, but it's actually more of like a buttery, creamy tone. So you can have fresh Chardonnays that can be sometimes perceived as oaky, but with Chablis, you're never really going to get that. It's much further north, which means the wines are going to have more acidity in them anyway than, say, from something way down south than like the Maconnais or the Côte Chalonnais way by Leon. But yeah, let's give it a taste. As you can see in the glass, it's a really gorgeous golden colour, and this would come from the age. White wines darken as they age. This being a 2024, has 4 years of age on it now. On the nose, huge whack of citrus. Chablis, being this kind of super fresh style, is very kind of citrus driven with its flavours. And I can smell a little bit of that creaminess on the nose. It smells like butter when you open a fresh pat of butter. It's got that kind of creamy smell to it. So let's give it a sip. My mouth has just started salivating super hard. Super, super high acidity in this. In wine terminology, a lot of people would say it's very dry, and this is very dry. I think Sainsbury's give this a 2 out of 9 on the dryness scale, but this is a good dry white wine. Loads of citrus. There's lemon peel, lemon juice. There's a bit of like an orangey character to it as well, and it's just gorgeously creamy and soft as well. It's not like spiky acidity. It's beautiful, smooth, rounded acidity. Let's start off with some geography. So if you've had the displeasure of listening to a wine nerd like myself talk about wine and waffle on about it for an extended period of time, you will have undoubtedly heard the word terroir. Now, what do I actually mean when I say terroir? Well, terroir is basically the environment in which the grapes are grown. So a lot of factors come into play for that. The soils, what we call aspect. So many vineyards are on hills, and the aspect is what angle that hill faces at. Better vineyard sites generally have a better aspect, which means they're in the northern hemisphere, they're generally facing southeast. In the southern hemisphere, they're facing northwest. And this just means that throughout the day and throughout the ripening period, those vineyards are in the best position to get the most sunlight possible. Chablis is actually considered part of a different terroir to Burgundy. Burgundy is considered to be what we call a continental climate. Continental climates aren't affected by any kind of bodies of water. Now, bodies of water do a couple things. They heat up slower, they increase humidity, but they also cool down slower, which that extends the kind of ripening period because they act as a big radiator for the surrounding area. Chablis sits in a basin that stretches all the way down from the Mediterranean coast of France near Spain, all the way up to Paris. Now, what this does is it acts as a wind tunnel. So all of these lovely, hot, warming winds coming off of the Mediterranean blow up, and Chablis is a long way from the Mediterranean, but these winds do have an effect on the growth of the grapes throughout the season, specifically during a key time, which is autumn. Now, autumn is a big, super important time for growing grapes. It's normally when harvest occurs, but it means that you have fruit on the vine, and fruit is very susceptible to stuff like frosts, rains, hail especially. But what these lovely kind of warming Mediterranean winds do for Chablis is they keep the area nice and warm well into September, which really just extends that ripening period, allows the fruit to develop for longer on the vine, increases what we call their hang time, which means they develop this really full, rounded flavour. Another thing that happens in what we call a maritime climate, the French call it an oceanic climate, is they have a high, what we call a diurnal range. This is effectively the difference in temperature between day and night. And Chablis, especially during that ripening period, has really quite hot days, can get as high as 30 degrees, but very cool nights, 4 or 5 degrees centigrade. And this means as the fruit ripens, that constant cooling when it gets to night means the fruit doesn't convert all of its acidity, which is great for a style like Chablis, which is supposed to be beautiful and minerally and fresh and super high acidity. You don't want it to be too hot overnight, because otherwise it will end up being what we would call flabby. It would just produce a wine that wouldn't have any acidity, would not have any dimension, and would lose all of its aging potential. Chablis is kind of broken down into 4 different tiers, and you'll be able to see what you're buying based just by looking at your bottle. So we'll start with the 2 lowest ones, which of course are Petit Chablis and Chablis. Now, Petit Chablis is seen as the least prestigious of the 4, and that's because it covers the least used sites on the tops of the hills. These sites are very susceptible to winds, obviously being at the tops of the hills. They also don't have the same soil composure that you get on the slopes and in the basin. Chablis, regular Chablis, will be grown on the flats at the bottom of the hill, and is really kind of the broader term that you have for Chablis production. So if you've had a Chablis before, if it's not marked as Premier Cru or Grand Cru, it's going to be from the flats. Petit Chablis is always labelled as Petit Chablis, even though apart from some very minor differences in the wine's productions, they produce very similar grape varieties. And a little inside line, it's 2024 as I'm recording this. The Chablis region had a very poor year. They had a hard winter, and they've had a really wet ripening period. But the Petit Chablis vineyards sat quite a bit above all of that. So Petit Chablis is going to be where you're going to get some really fantastic bang for your buck for the 2024 vintage. Now, the second or third tier, technically, of Chablis is Chablis Premier Cru. This will either be denoted on the bottle with the words Premier Cru, or you'll also see it with 1 and then ER Cru on the bottle. This comes from the slopes of Chablis, generally the southeasterly facing slopes, with a blend of 2 different soils, but largely the Carmigerian soil, which is very high in maritime fossils and minerals, which are great for vine growth. Chablis Premier Cru is broken up into about 40 different climats, These climats are then subdivided into 100 different growing vineyards owned by producers all over the place. These are normally on the southeasterly facing slopes, but there are some on south facing slopes too. The rules aren't super tight that they require a specific aspect for the wines to be grown at. And altogether, these 40 climats add up to about 1,900 acres, or about 1,450 football fields for any Americans in the audience. In production terms, Chablis Premier Cru is broadly similar to the rules of production as you get in Chablis. However, it requires 0.5% higher alcohol per litre, which requires the producers to pick the grapes when they are perfectly ripe. There are also maximum yields that Chablis Premier Cru producers need to follow, and this kind of stops the dilution of the Premier Cru brand, but also makes sure that the vines are producing fruit to the best quality that they can be. Chablis Premier Crus can go from anywhere from about £25 upwards to about £300-400 for some really exceptional examples. And lastly, we have the creme de la creme, Chablis Grand Cru. Now, Chablis Grand Cru is subdivided into 7 different climats compared to the 40 of Chablis Premier Cru, and they all have their own names, which, if you'll excuse me, I'll have to read them. So they are Purest, Beaujolais, Val d'Isère, Grenouille, Valmer, L'Eclos, and Blanche d'Eau. These are all on the best limestone-rich soils on sites immediately looking over the village of Chablis itself, and have the tightest rules around how it's produced. So Chablis Grand Cru requires a maximum of 3.8 tons of fruit per hectare, which is about 20% less than Grand Cru. Than Premier Cru. Good Lord, I need to get this right way around. And requires 1 degree higher alcohol per litre than Chablis. So it requires it to be at a minimum 12% alcohol. Though many examples reach higher than that. It's entirely dependent on how hot the year is. Chablis Grand Cru is really, really well known for its kind of very honeyed character. And that comes from the rules around its maturation. So Chablis Grand Crus must be matured until at least the 15th of March after the year of its harvest, and cannot be sold until at least the 30th of March in that same year. This gives it these really beautiful kind of notes of honeyed limes, and amazing complex minerality throughout. Chablis Grand Cru also ages exceedingly well, and most examples on decent years will go up to 10 years in bottle if aged in the correct environment, but exceptional years can be pushing 25 or 30 and still have room to go. It's a really, really fantastic style. However, Chablis Grand Cru generally starts at about £200 to £300 sterling, and exceptional years can be pushing well into 4 digits. Well, I just want to say thank you for watching. If you've made it this far, if you've enjoyed this, please hit that subscribe button. Drop a comment, drop a like. We're going to be making our way through Burgundy, but if there's any particular parts of Chardonnay production that you really want me to cover, do please drop a comment. And actually drop me a comment of where you're watching from right now. I'd love to really talk to my audience and develop a good kind of relationship with you guys, so we can share ideas and discuss wine together. Anyway, I've been the Sussex Wine Guy. Thanks for watching. Cheers.